A summer day begins with the usual routine in Clara and David's home. They've been together for over 10 years, and to everyone around, their marriage seems perfect. Clara works at a local school in the suburbs where they live, while David is a successful entrepreneur. Their house is always filled with warmth and harmony. Neighbors and friends see them as the ideal couple, and the family photos they post on social media show that they're happy together. Clara goes about her usual day. After work, she stops by her best friend Mia's house, who lives nearby. Mia is a single mother raising her 4-year-old son, Lucas. Clara and Mia have known each other since childhood and have always been very close. Despite being alone, Mia often smiles and tries to keep herself together for her son. Clara genuinely empathizes with Mia, knowing how difficult it is for her to raise a child alone. They sit at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and discussing the latest news. Mia talks about how hard it is to be the sole guardian for Lucas, but Clara, as always, tries to support her, reminding her that she can always count on her and David's help. Mia is often a guest at Clara and David's house. On the evening of June 3rd, they have a family dinner. David, as always, is caring and attentive, helping Clara in the kitchen while Mia plays with Lucas in the living room. To Clara, this evening feels perfect. Her beloved husband and best friend are there, sharing in their lives. She has no idea that at this very moment, there is something in her life she is completely unaware of. David acts as he usually does, smiling, joking, and caring for their guests. Mia seems to genuinely enjoy the company of Clara and her husband. Their conversations are full of laughter and reminiscing about the past, and nothing foreshadows the approaching storm. Clara meets up with Mia at a cafe after school. Mia seems a bit upset and distant, but explains it as difficulties at work and the challenges of raising her son. Clara, as always, tries to cheer her up, reminding her that friends are there to help. They sit by the window, discussing plans for the upcoming weekend. Clara suggests that Mia and Lucas spend time at their house. Mia agrees, and they plan to meet on Saturday. Once again, everyone gathers at Clara and David's home. Mia and Lucas come over, and the atmosphere is filled with joy. David pays a lot of attention to Lucas, playing with him, which makes Clara smile. It warms her heart to see how caring and kind her husband can be. They all dine together, discuss the news, and make plans for the summer. Mia watches Clara and David. Her gaze occasionally turns thoughtful, but she tries not to show her emotions. Clara starts noticing that Mia spends more and more time at their house. David doesn't seem to mind. On the contrary, he encourages the idea of having Mia and Lucas as part of their daily lives. He takes care of them, buys gifts for Lucas, and often suggests they all spend time together. Clara doesn't see anything suspicious in this. For her, it is yet another confirmation of what a wonderful husband and friend David is. These moments strengthen her belief that she has everything she needs to be happy: a loving husband, a reliable friend, and a cozy home. Little does she know, however, that behind this facade of a perfect life lies a dark secret. It was just an ordinary Saturday for Clara. She woke up early to start cleaning the house. That day, David had left for business, leaving her alone. Clara always loved order, so she decided it was finally time to tidy up their home office, which they rarely used. The office was more of David's territory, where he kept his documents, books, and work materials. While sorting through the shelves and organizing papers, Clara came across a stack of folders. Among them was one she hadn't noticed before. It was a gray folder with numbered pages inside. There was no title on the cover to hint at its contents. Curiosity got the best of her, and Clara opened the folder to see what was inside. Inside were official documents, printouts from government offices, certificates, and notarized papers. As she carefully examined them, Clara noticed that they mentioned the adoption of a child. She slowly flipped through the pages, feeling her heart pound faster. When she reached the document with the names, her eyes froze. Under the mother section was Mia's name, and under adopter was David Johnson. Clara sank into the nearest chair, trying to process what she had just read. How is this possible, she thought. The adoption document was dated several years earlier, long before their current happiness and friendship with Mia. Tears began to well up in her eyes, and a flood of questions filled her mind. Why had David done this behind her back? Why had Mia never mentioned it? Clara felt a surge of anger and confusion. She continued to sift through the papers, searching for any explanations. The documents confirmed that the adoption had been completed officially, with signatures from both parties and the approval of child welfare authorities. Inside the folder, Clara also found a letter from a lawyer, stating that the adoption deal had been finalized and that the matter had been kept strictly confidential for personal reasons. The letter was addressed to David and contained instructions on how to keep the adoption a secret. Sitting in the silence of the office, Clara reviewed each document, hoping to find some kind of explanation. But instead of answers, she found only more questions. Clara began to replay recent events in her head. Mia's frequent visits, David's special attention to Lucas, the constant discussions about offering help. Now, all of it seemed strange and suspicious. She felt the ground shift beneath her, and her once happy marriage was suddenly shrouded in a huge deception. Clutching the papers in her hands, Clara paced nervously around the office. She knew she had to confront David immediately. However, fear, anger, and confusion paralyzed her. How could he hide something like this from her? How could Mia be a part of this and come into their home acting as though nothing had happened? Clara's mind was in turmoil. She tried to make sense of it all, but the more she thought, the less she understood. She spent the rest of the day deep in thought, keeping the secret to herself. She waited for David to come home, contemplating how to approach the conversation. Doubts and suspicions gnawed at her. She started running through possible explanations in her head, but none of them eased her heart. That day marked the beginning of the end of Clara's faith in her perfect family life. After a sleepless night, Clara finally decided she could no longer keep this secret to herself. Her doubts and anger grew like wildfire, and she realized she had to get answers from both David and Mia. The morning arrived with a heavy silence, and Clara could barely hold back her emotions as she watched David walk out the door. She decided to call Mia over first so they could all talk together and uncover the truth. Mia, unaware of what was about to unfold, came over as she had many times before. David was in his office when Clara, with determination in her eyes, invited Mia inside and asked her to sit in the living room. The room was filled with tension, and Clara's nervousness was clear. Mia noticed her unease and sat down, asking what was wrong. Clara walks out of David's office, clutching the folder of documents she had found the day before. Her hands are trembling, but she clenches them into fists, trying not to reveal her emotions. "Can you explain this to me?" she says, throwing the folder onto the table in front of Mia. David steps out of the office upon hearing the conversation, his face instantly turning pale. A heavy silence fills the room. Mia slowly opens the folder and glances through the documents, realizing the truth has come to light. David remains silent, struggling to keep his emotions in check, but his hands are visibly shaking. Clara stands nearby, waiting for an explanation. Her heart is pounding so loudly, it feels like it's echoing throughout the entire room. Under the weight of the scene, Mia finally begins to speak. She looks at Clara with deep regret in her eyes. "It's true," she starts quietly, avoiding Clara's gaze. Taking a deep breath, she continues, "A few years ago, when I was going through a rough time, David and we got close. It was foolish, and I immediately regretted it, but then I found out I was pregnant." Clara listens, feeling her world collapse around her. She turns her gaze to David, who has been standing with his head lowered the entire time. "I couldn't keep the child, but I also couldn't raise him alone," Mia says, holding back tears. "We decided that David would adopt him to avoid a scandal and to not destroy your life." Clara freezes as Mia finishes her words. It now becomes clear why David had hidden this secret and why Mia never mentioned Lucas's father. David lifts his head and, trying to stay calm, addresses Clara. "I did it for us. For our marriage. I knew that if you found out the truth, it would destroy us. So I decided to keep it a secret." Anger and pain surge through Clara. She screams, accusing David and Mia of betrayal and deceit. She demands to know how they could come into her home, look her in the eye, and act like nothing had happened. Mia cries, attempting to explain that they did it for Lucas's sake, so he could have a complete family. The scene turns into emotional chaos. Clara, shattered, storms out of the room, leaving David and Mia alone with their fear and guilt. Her world is in ruins, and she has no idea what to do next. This truth that has surfaced marks the beginning of a true nightmare that they will all have to face. After the morning confrontation, the Johnson house is filled with an oppressive silence. Clara, still in shock, sits in the living room, unable to comprehend what is happening. Questions whirl around in her mind. How could they? How could her husband and best friend betray her like this? David paces around the house, trying to find the words to explain his actions. Mia sits in the corner, hiding her face in her hands, feeling the weight of guilt and shame. An hour of silence passes before Clara explodes. She can no longer contain her anger and pain. How could you? She yells at David, unable to hold back her tears. You destroyed our life. You destroyed everything. David tries to approach her, but she pushes him away. Clara turns on Mia, shouting, "You were my friend. How could you?" David steps between them, trying to calm Clara down. "Understand, I did it for our family," he says, attempting to justify himself. "I didn't want everything to fall apart. I thought I could control the situation." His words only fuel Clara's rage. "Control? You call this control? You've been lying to me for years," she screams, feeling her world collapse. Mia finally lifts her head. She is in tears, but her eyes show determination. "Clara, I know this is awful, but I've been in love with David from the very beginning," she admits quietly. "When I got pregnant, I thought he could love me and the baby. I hoped everything would change, but he said everything he did was for you." Clara is stunned by this confession. She realizes that her marriage has become a victim of futile hopes and manipulation. David tries to explain, "I never wanted to betray you, Clara. I thought I could keep our life intact if I kept everything a secret." The emotions in the room reach a fever pitch. Clara, unable to handle all these revelations, grabs a vase from the table and hurls it against the wall near David. "Do you think excuses will save you?" she screams. Mia, in turn, starts sobbing, begging Clara for forgiveness. David understands that his justifications are only making things worse. He lowers his head and sits down on a chair, desperately trying to find a way out of this chaos. Clara paces around the room, her emotions fluctuating wildly, from anger to deep despair. She feels that her life will never be the same again. After a long standoff, Clara suddenly stops and says quietly, "You both need to leave." David and Mia are stunned by her demand. "You want us to go?" David asks in surprise. "Yes," Clara responds firmly. "You both betrayed me. I need time to figure out what to do next. Leave and give me some space." David and Mia exchange glances, not knowing what to do. But at that moment, they realize Clara has already made up her mind. 2 days have passed since the explosive scene in the Johnson household. Clara, trying not to go insane from the pain and betrayal, attempts to distract herself, but her thoughts keep drifting back to that conversation. She feels there might be more between David and Mia that they haven't revealed. Suspicions and doubts eat away at her from the inside. In a desperate attempt to find answers, Clara decides to check David's phone. She knows he has a second phone, which he supposedly uses for work, and that he always hides it in his office. That day, David leaves for work and Clara begins her search. She enters the office and starts rummaging through the desk drawers. Deep in one of the drawers, she finds the hidden phone. With difficulty, she enters the passcode, assuming David uses one of his usual combinations. Her hands tremble as the phone unlocks. The first thing that catches her eye is dozens of messages from Mia. She opens the chat and starts scrolling through their conversations. The messages date back to when she first became friends with Mia. A sense of horror and fury builds up as she sees that they continue to communicate in secret to this day. The texts are filled with candid confessions, hints at secret meetings, and even discussions on how to keep everything hidden from Clara. Tears start streaming down Clara's face as she sees the photos, David and Mia together, smiling, holding hands. This was not just a one-time mistake. This was a betrayal that had been going on for years. They had hidden not only the adoption, but also their ongoing affair. She finds recent messages in which Mia writes about missing him, and David promises to find a way to meet. Clara feels her rage starting to boil over. She closes the phone and throws it onto the desk. Scenes from the recent past flash through her mind. David's caring gestures toward Mia, their secretive glances, the frequent closed-door conversations. She realizes that all this time, she had been deceived, and they had been playing on her trust. Instead of succumbing to despair, Clara feels a surge of rage. Her emotions start to transform into a thirst for revenge. She doesn't want to simply walk away and leave everything as it is. They have to pay for what they've done. They need to feel the same pain she's experiencing. A plan slowly forms in her mind, a dark, calculated plan that she is determined to execute to punish them both. Clara locks herself in the bedroom and begins plotting out every detail. She recalls all the little things David and Mia have told her. She knows where they usually meet, how they plan their secret calls. She realizes that she has enough information to plan her move in such a way that no one will suspect what she is about to do. Clara starts preparing, firmly deciding that this time, she will take control of the situation. Her gaze is now cold and focused. She is no longer the victim. She is the hunter, ready to strike at the most unexpected moment. It's June 30th, the day that will change everything. Clara, having meticulously planned her move, prepares for the final meeting. For the past 2 days, she has remained calm, leading David and Mia to believe she has started to come to terms with everything. The day before, she called both Mia and David, saying she wanted to meet and discuss things, to try and find a way out of the situation together. Clara emphasized that she didn't want any more conflicts and insisted that the conversation should be peaceful. Both of them agreed, albeit with some suspicion. However, the desire to end this prolonged nightmare won out, and they decided to come. The house is set up for dinner. Clara sets the table, lights candles, and fills glasses with wine. She does everything to create the illusion of a calm, family dinner. But inside her, a volcano of anger is raging. She carefully hides a knife under the tablecloth, preparing for what is to come next. David and Mia arrive almost simultaneously. Entering the house, they feel the tension in the air, but outwardly, Clara remains cold and composed, smiling as if everything is fine. She invites them to the table, offering drinks and appetizers. Everything seems normal, but each of them feels like they're sitting on a powder keg. Dinner begins. The conversation starts off calmly, mostly about everyday things. But soon, the atmosphere grows heavy. Clara makes a few veiled hints that make David and Mia tense up. She mentions moments from their messages, events only she could know about from observing their secret meetings. Suddenly, Clara sets her fork down on the table and looks directly into David's eyes. "So, how did it all start, David?" she asks, cold and direct. An awkward silence follows. David starts to make excuses, trying to explain that it was all a mistake, that he never meant to hurt her. Mia lowers her head, her hands trembling with tension. She knows there's no more hiding. The verbal sparring intensifies. David raises his voice. Mia tries to intervene, but Clara doesn't let them say a word. She unleashes a torrent of accusations, pouring out everything that's built up over the past few weeks. Mia also loses her composure and starts shouting back, justifying her actions with her love for David. She admits that she hopes she and David could be together. Clara looks at them, her face contorted with pain and rage. "You both betrayed me," she says, her voice quivering with fury. Mia tries to speak again, but Clara raises her hand, demanding silence. At that moment, a silence falls, lasting only a few seconds. But in those seconds, Clara feels everything inside her tearing apart. She grabs the knife from under the tablecloth and, in a fit of rage, lunges at Mia. It all happens so quickly that David doesn't have time to react. The knife in Clara's hand gleams in the candlelight for a split second before plunging into Mia's side. Mia lets out a scream, trying to push Clara away. But Clara is like a woman possessed. David finally snaps out of his daze and lunges at Clara, trying to wrest the knife from her hands. A chaotic struggle ensues, filled with screams and the sounds of a frantic fight. Clara, consumed by fury and desperation, continues to fight, oblivious to everything around her. Blood begins to drip onto the floor, mixing with shards of broken dishes and spilled wine. Mia, immobilized and shocked, collapses to the floor. David, breathing heavily, finally manages to wrest the knife from Clara's grip and throws it aside. The room fills with silence, broken only by ragged breaths and quiet sobs. The room echoes with a dull hum and the sound of breathing. David stares in horror at Clara, who stands over Mia, her hand trembling as she grips the knife. Mia writhes on the floor in pain, blood quickly pooling on the wooden floor. David rushes to Mia, trying to help, shouting, "Are you insane, Clara? What have you done?" Clara, overcome with despair and fury, takes a few steps back. Her eyes are filled with pain and rage, and her hands tremble, holding the bloodied knife. In that moment, she realizes there's no turning back. David, trying to stop the bleeding, yells at Clara, "Call an ambulance, now!" But Clara stands still, her gaze empty as if in a trance. She looks at her blood-covered hands, struggling to fully comprehend what just happened. Suddenly, her expression hardens, and a thought forms in her mind. Everything that happened is the result of betrayal, and now justice must be served to the end. Realizing that Clara is in a dangerous state, David slowly rises from the floor. He tries to approach her, extending his hands to grab the knife. But Clara straightens up abruptly, raising the knife, ready to defend herself. "Clara, please put the knife down," David pleads, trying not to make any sudden movements. "We can fix this, just let me help." But his words only add fuel to the fire. Rage boils within Clara. She screams, "Fix it? You betrayed me. You destroyed everything we had." At that moment, the tension reaches its peak. Clara lunges at David with the knife. He tries to dodge and grab her arm, but Clara fights back desperately, trying to strike him. They both fall to the floor, and a chaotic struggle ensues. Furniture topples, objects fly in all directions. During the struggle, David manages to grab Clara's hand, but she, mad with fury, twists his arm. The knife slips and plunges into David's side. He lets out a muffled groan, his face contorting with pain. Clara freezes for a moment, realizing what she's just done. David releases her hand and collapses to the floor next to Mia. He breathes heavily, trying to hold the wound, but blood quickly seeps through his fingers. "What have you done?" he whispers, looking at Clara with horror and despair. Clara stands over the bodies of her husband and best friend. Her heart is pounding in her chest, her hands are trembling, and her eyes stare into emptiness. A look of horror and shock flashes across her face. She slowly sinks to her knees, throwing the knife aside, and covers her face with her hands, sobbing. Her mind finally begins to grasp that she has just destroyed her life and the lives of those she once held dear. The room is filled with the sound of her sobs as the blood continues to spread across the floor. Mia is no longer showing any signs of life, and David breathes in short, ragged gasps, fighting for each breath. Clara sits amidst the chaos and blood, realizing there is no way back. Clara sits on the floor in the middle of the living room. Her legs slide through the pools of blood that have spread across the wooden floor, mixing with shattered dishes and overturned furniture. Her gaze is fixed forward, but she sees nothing. Her head spins from shock and horror, her breathing growing rapid, as if she's about to lose consciousness. Nearby, in the shadow of the overturned table, lie the lifeless bodies of Mia and David. Clara can't bring herself to turn her head toward them. She knows this isn't a dream, not a nightmare. This is the reality she has created. Dried blood coats her hands, her dress is stained, and the knife she just dropped lies on the floor, its shiny metal now covered with a dark crimson crust. The silence in the house is deafening. Only the muffled sounds of traffic from outside can be heard through the walls. Clara covers her face with her hands, trembling from the tension and horror. She feels a lump rising in her throat, but she can't scream. All the emotions that had boiled within her have drained her completely. Her head drops, and her eyes fall on the pictures hanging on the wall. In one photo, it's her and David on their wedding day. They're smiling, holding each other, looking so happy and carefree. In another, it's Clara and Mia sitting in the kitchen with glasses of wine in their hands, laughing over some long-forgotten joke. The photographs seem like ghosts from her past, reminders of what has been lost forever. Suddenly, Clara hears the distant sound of sirens. It's like a thunderclap shattering the silence. The police sirens grow louder, and Clara's heart begins to pound in her chest. She realizes someone has called the police. The Johnsons live in a quiet neighborhood, and loud noises in the evening immediately catch the neighbors' attention. The screams, sounds of a struggle, and breaking dishes had clearly alarmed them. Fearing that something terrible was happening, one of the neighbors had called the police, reporting a possible domestic violence incident. Clara understands this is the end. She slowly tries to stand, but her legs give out, and she falls back to her knees. Tears well up in her eyes, sliding down her cheeks and soaking into her blood-stained clothes. She breathes deeply, trying to comprehend that her life is now utterly ruined. This isn't just the end of a relationship or a family. It's the end of her future, her hopes, her very self. The headlights pierce through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Clara hears the police car screech to a stop in front of their house, and for a moment, she freezes. Her gaze shifts back to the photographs. How did it come to this? Flickers through her mind. She remembers the days when they were happy, when the house was filled with laughter and joy. But now, all of that is drowned in blood and pain. The police break down the door. Clara hears them shout, warning her not to move. Soon, beams of light from their flashlights flood into the living room, and she feels their eyes on her. She doesn't resist. She doesn't try to explain anything. She just stays where she is, head bowed, her whole body trembling. The officers rush toward her, ordering her to lie down on the floor. They put handcuffs on her, and Clara mechanically obeys every command as if she no longer exists in this world. She feels the cold metal around her wrists and knows that it's all over. They lead her out of the house. She glances back one last time at the living room, at the corner where everything had once seemed perfect, now shadowed by the deadly tragedy that remains.